Welcome. Today we are exploring a really staggering volume of source material. It all concerns one of the most publicly scrutinized civil actions in recent memory. The defamation trial of John C. Depp, Brevi Amber, Laura Heard. If you were anywhere near the news in the spring of 2022, you know this case. It absolutely captured global attention for weeks, playing out live from a courtroom in Fairfax County, Virginia.
It really did.
And our intention here is to move past the sensational celebrity drama of it all. We want to conduct a really impartial examination of the legal mechanisms at play, the explosive media coverage that followed, and the lasting societal impacts this trial has had.
Especially on conversations around intimate partner violence and the limits of free speech.
It's exact.
And it's so important to approach this material with the seriousness it demands. I mean, the allegations made by both parties are incredibly serious. They involve claims of violence and trauma. This was never just a squabble between two famous people. This was a high-stakes legal battle. Depp was seeking $50 million in damages from Heard, and she then counterclaimed for $100 million. So we're going to unpack the entire context starting right at the beginning.
Let's do that. Where does this all start?
Well, to really get the foundation, we have to go back to the timeline of the relationship itself. The two actors first met back in 2009. They were filming The Rum Diary.
Okay, so they knew each other for a while.
For a while, yeah. But their romantic relationship didn't begin until a bit later, around late 2011, maybe early 2012. And the way their personal lives then escalated into this public legal war is, I mean, it's almost a textbook example of how a private dispute can just explode into a global cultural event.
And they got married.
They married in February 2015, but the marriage itself barely lasted a year before things became very public, very turbulent. Heard filed for divorce on May 23, 2016.
Yep.
And at the same time, she obtained a temporary restraining order against Depp. She alleged physical abuse.
And Depp's response?
He immediately and vehemently denied those claims. His representatives put out a statement saying she was, and this is a quote, attempting to secure a premature financial resolution by alleging abuse.
So right from the very beginning, the battle lines were drawn. It was framed as a financial dispute versus an abuse claim.
Exactly. That initial public framing set this incredibly antagonistic tone that would, really define their entire public battle for years to come.
So the divorce was eventually finalized in January 2017.
Yeah.
And there was a settlement.
Yes, a $7 million settlement. And as part of that, Heard received that money and made a very public commitment at the time.
Right, the donation pledge. I remember this.
She pledged to donate the full amount to two organizations, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, and the Children's Hospital Los Angeles.
Which, on its face, is a very powerful statement.
It is. It was framed as this selfless act, that she wasn't after his money. But that pledge, it became a huge point of contention later during the Virginia trial.
Because Depp's legal team really used it to try and undermine her credibility.
They absolutely did. And the settlement also included a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. It was supposed to prevent either party from discussing the specifics of their relationship in public.
Supposed to.
Supposed to, yes.
And this is where the financial details get really critical. Because during the U.S. trial in April 2022, the chief operating officer of the ACLU, a man named Terrence Doherty, he testified about the status of that $7 million pledge.
And his testimony was a bombshell.
It really was. He confirmed that in the 5 years since the divorce, Heard had paid less than half of the amount she'd promised.
And it gets even more complicated. Doherty's testimony revealed that a lot of the money that the ACLU did receive was thought to have come from third parties.
Not from her directly.
Not directly, no. There were contributions they traced back to the tech billionaire Elon Musk, who Heard was dating after the split. And surprisingly, even $100,000 that Depp himself had sent directly to the ACLU on her behalf.
Wow. So he was, in a way, paying her pledge for her.
It seems he believed he was fulfilling her pledge, yes. So you have the situation where the promise was made very publicly, but the actual fulfillment was, according to the ACLU's own COO, fragmented and incomplete.
And did Heard have an explanation for this?
She did. She later testified that her intention was always to fulfill the pledge over a 10-year period, and she said the delay in the payment schedule was a direct result of Depp's lawsuits against her.
Claiming they were draining her financial resources.
Exactly. But that testimony, particularly the fact that the full amount hadn't been transferred, that was a huge tactical victory for Depp's team. It planted a seed of doubt about her truthfulness right from the start.
Okay, so that's the divorce. But before we get to the U.S. trial, we have to talk about the U.K. case, because it's impossible to understand the Virginia trial without it.
You're absolutely right. Before the U.S. suit really got going, Depp pursued legal action in the High Court of Justice in London.
This was against the newspaper The Sun.
Yes. It started after the British tabloid published an article in 2018 that described him as a wife-beater. That phrase prompted Depp to sue the publisher, News Group Newspapers Ltd., for libel.
And that UK trial, that took place in July 2020. The scope was a little different from the US case, wasn't it? The question was really whether the Sun's description was, substantially true.
Precisely. And the presiding judge, Judge Andrew Nicol, he ruled against Depp in November 2020. And this ruling was extraordinarily damaging for Depp's public image and his career.
It was damning.
It really was. Judge Nicol concluded that the defendants, in this case, the Sun, had proven to the civil standard that, and I'm quoting, the great majority of alleged assaults of Mrs. Heard by Mr. Depp have been proved.
Wow. And he got specific.
Very specific. The verdict found that Depp had assaulted Heard in 12 of the 14 alleged incidents that were presented. The judge wrote in his judgment that this was sufficient to establish that the newspaper's description was essentially true.
And the career repercussions were immediate.
Swift and immediate. After that verdict, Warner Bros. Asked him to resign from the Fantastic Beasts film series. He tried to appeal the ruling, of course, arguing he hadn't received a fair hearing.
But that was rejected.
It was. The Court of Appeal rejected the request. They concluded the appeal had, quote, no real prospect of success, which basically affirmed the initial judge's conclusion.
So this brings us to the crucial question that sets up the U.S. case. When Depp decided to sue Heard for defamation in Virginia, a lot of legal experts were deeply skeptical about his chances.
And for good reason.
Why? What's the key difference?
It comes down to the legal systems. In the UK, the burden of proof is primarily on the defendant, the publisher in that case, to prove the statement was true. But in the US, it's completely different, especially for a public figure like Depp.
Because of the First Amendment.
Exactly. Because of the First Amendment, the burden is exponentially higher. Depp had to prove 3 things. 1, that the statement was about him. 2, that it was false. And 3, this is the big one, that it was made with actual malice.
Okay, that term, actual malice, is absolutely critical. We need to define it right now before we go any further, because it's not what most people think it means. It doesn't just mean the person had ill will or was angry.
Precisely. You've hit on the key point. Under U.S. law, especially after the landmark Supreme Court case New York Times Company v. Sullivan, actual malice has a very specific legal meaning.
It means the person making the statement either knew it was false when they said it,
or that they acted with reckless disregard for whether it was false or not. It's an enormous hurdle to clear. So you can see the problem. Since a UK judge had already found 12 incidents of abuse to be proven.
How could Depp possibly prove that Heard's statements about being a victim of abuse were false, let alone made with actual malice? It seems impossible.
And that is the pivotal question that allowed this case to proceed despite the UK ruling. Heard's legal team, naturally, they tried to get the US suit dismissed. They argued the UK judgment should stand as precedent that the truth of the abuse allegations had already been established.
But the judge in Virginia, Judge Penny Askeret, she didn't agree.
She didn't. She overruled that motion. And our sources detail her reasoning pretty clearly. She cited 3 key differences between the cases that, in her view, prevented the UK ruling from blocking the US trial.
What were they?
First, Heard was only a witness in the UK case. She wasn't the defendant. In Virginia, she was the named defendant. That's a huge difference.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, she said the factual basis was different. The U.S. claim focused specifically on statements Heard made in the 2018 Washington Post op-ed, which was published after the English case had already begun. And finally, she noted that the 2 parties hadn't been subject to the same discovery and evidence disclosure procedures in the U.K. as they were in the U.S.
So it sounds like Judge Askeret carved out this very narrow, very specific legal path for the case to move forward. She was basically saying the U.S. court could examine the specific First Amendment issues related to this specific op-ed, regardless of the U.K. finding.
That's a perfect way to put it. And that allowed the case to proceed. And the choice of venue itself, Virginia, that was a very calculated part of Depp's legal strategy.
All right, this is what's known as forum shopping.
A classic case of it. His legal team strategically chose Fairfax County, Virginia, for 2 primary reasons. First, Virginia allows for a jury trial in civil defamation cases. That was key.
Unlike the UK case, which was decided solely by a judge.
Exactly. Depp's team clearly preferred to present their narrative to a jury of regular people rather than a single judge. And second, Fairfax County was the jurisdiction where the Washington Post, which published the op-ed, had both its online servers and its print editions published. That provided the necessary link to establish jurisdiction.
It's just fascinating, the contrast. The UK system focuses on the truth of the statement, but the US system, it focuses on the mindset of the speaker because of these heavy protections for public speech.
It really is. And it meant the U.S. trial wasn't just going to be about whether abuse occurred. It was fundamentally about whether Amber Heard lied about her experience in a published article and whether she did so with malice.
Okay, so let's pivot to the central battlefield of this case, the words themselves. Depp's entire claim hinged on that 2018 op-ed Heard wrote for the Washington Post.
It was titled, "Amber Heard, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change."
And this is such a critical point. The op-ed never mentioned Johnny Depp by name.
Not once.
Never. Which meant Depp's lawyers had a big job to do. They had to convince the jury that even without his name, the identity of the person she was referencing was overwhelmingly clear to any reasonable reader.
Especially in the context of what had already happened in May 2016.
Precisely. And the defamation claims, they zeroed in on 3 specific phrases within that op-ed.
So what was the first one?
The first phrase they contested was the opening line itself. I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. Depp's team argued that by implication, this suggested he was a perpetrator of sexual violence.
Okay, and the second? The second phrase was the one that directly referenced the timeline of their split. Heard wrote, 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse, and I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out.
And 2 years before that op-ed was published was exactly May 2016.
Exactly when she filed the restraining order against Depp. The link was, undeniable. It established her as the public figure of abuse with him as the implied accused.
And the third phrase targeted the systemic issues. She wrote about seeing, in real time, how institutions protect men accused of abuse.
And Depp argued that these 3 statements, when you take them together, they falsely branded him as a domestic abuser, a sexual assailant, and an institutional threat. And he claimed this caused new and severe damage to his career and reputation, damage that was distinct from what happened after the UK case.
But Heard didn't just defend her article. She countersued for $100 million.
She did. And her counterclaim wasn't targeting Depp directly, but rather 3 statements that were made by his former lawyer, Adam Waldman.
These were published in the Daily Mail in 2020. And they basically accused Heard of creating an abuse hoax.
Yes, the Waldman statements were incredibly inflammatory. The first one, for example, claimed Heard and her friends used fake sexual violence allegations as both sword and shield. The third one declared, "We have reached the beginning of the end of Mrs. Heard's abuse hoax against Johnny Depp."
But the jury's verdict ultimately hinged on the second statement, which was the most specific.
It was very specific. Waldman detailed a particular incident, the 2016 police call to their penthouse. And Waldman stated that the entire incident was, quote, an ambush, a hoax.
And he went further.
He did. He alleged that after the police first arrived and saw no damage, Heard and her friends then spilled a little wine and roughed the place up, got their story straight under the direction of a lawyer and publicist, and then placed a second call to 911.
So a direct accusation of staging evidence of conspiracy to defame him?
Yes, a very serious claim. And that specific statement became the core of Heard's successful counterclaim.
So let's talk about the trial itself, which kicked off with these explosive opening statements in April of 2022. Depp's legal strategy was aggressive from the start. It focused on completely flipping the narrative.
It did. They accused her of fabricating the abuse entirely to advance her career. But more than that, they asserted that she was, in fact, the actual aggressor in the relationship. They frequently used the term mutual abuse.
And their presentation included very specific counter-allegations.
It did. They argued, for example, that Heard staged her bruised appearance on May 27, 2016. They brought in witnesses who claimed to have seen her without any visible injuries in the days just before that public appearance. They really emphasized that Depp hadn't even seen her since May 21st, implying the injuries were either self-inflicted or had nothing to do with him.
And how did Heard's team counter this?
They maintained their original position, that Depp was physically and sexually abusive on multiple occasions, and that this behavior was often fueled by drugs and alcohol. They argued the First Amendment protected her op-ed, that it was a broad discussion of domestic violence as an issue, not just about him.
They also tried to shift the focus onto Depp's own behavior, didn't they?
Yes. They claimed he had ruined his own career through his documented substance abuse and erratic behavior on set. They argued he had become unreliable to film studios long before the op-ed was ever published.
The complexity of this case is just staggering. It was illustrated by the sheer volume and diversity of witnesses that both sides called. They were providing two completely divergent views of the same history.
It was a very long trial. It consumed 6 weeks, and it covered everything from these alleged violent fights to detailed financial records of their spending.
Absolutely. The witness list, it read like a Hollywood expose mixed with a forensic psychological review. On Depp's side, we heard from a forensic psychologist, Dr. Shannon Curry.
Yes. And she testified, based on her evaluation of Heard, that Heard showed signs of 2 specific personality disorders: borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder.
And then there was testimony from his security guards.
That testimony was crucial and often bizarre. Starling Jenkins and Travis McGivern both testified. Jenkins was the one who claimed Heard referred to that now infamous incident of feces being found in their bed as a practical joke gone wrong.
Depp also called associates, like his neighbor Isaac Baruch, who testified about the alleged damage to the penthouse, and Heard's own former assistant, Kate James.
And Kate James described Heard as being verbally abusive toward her, which helped build Depp's narrative that Heard was the aggressor.
But then Heard's side presented a similarly diverse range of testimony, all aimed at proving a pattern of systemic abuse.
They brought in their own forensic psychologist, Dr. Dawn Hughes, who directly contradicted Dr. Curry's findings. She testified that Heard suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of intimate partner violence.
And her friends testified as well.
Yes, her close friends, Io Tillett Wright and Raquel Pennington, both testified in support of her allegations. And crucially, her sister, Whitney Henriquez, stated that she had personally witnessed a physical fight between the couple, which really bolstered Heard's narrative of physical aggression.
Then you had the celebrity figures, which just added to the whole spectacle.
It really did. Christian Carino, who was a former agent for both of them, he provided testimony about Heard's relationship with Elon Musk and her attempts to reconcile with Depp. And actress Ellen Barkin, who had a brief relationship with Depp in the past.
She testified that he was always drinking and controlling, which sort of corroborated the claims of erratic behavior.
But the key moment of rebuttal testimony, I think, for many people, belonged to the supermodel, Kate Moss.
This was a huge moment. She was called by Depp's team to address a long-standing rumor that Heard had mentioned in previous testimony, that Depp had pushed Moss down a flight of stairs when they dated back in the 1990s.
And Moss appeared via video link from England and very explicitly, very clearly denied the rumor. She stated that Depp had not pushed her down the stairs. That testimony was a specific and powerful blow to Heard's case.
Why was it so damaging?
Because it directly undermined her claim that she acted defensively in a fight involving her sister because she feared Depp would harm her sister just as she believed he had harmed Moss. It made her reasoning seem less credible to the jury.
And then we had corporate executives weighing in. This was essential for the crown of career damage, right?
Absolutely. A Disney executive named Tina Newman testified that she was not aware that the op-ed had played any part in Depp not being cast in a potential Pirates 6.
But on the other hand, the president of DC Films, Walter Hamada, he testified for Depp's rebuttal. He stated that Heard's role in Aquaman 2 was not affected by the op-ed.
Right, which contradicted what Heard's team was claiming. Hamada did, however, suggest that the studio was concerned about Heard's on-screen chemistry with the male lead, and that was their justification for potentially reducing her role.
And we can't forget that financial element that continued to haunt Heard.
Terrence Doherty, the ACLU COO, was called by Depp's team, and he confirmed all those payment discrepancies regarding the $7 million donation pledge. This was a critical tactical move by Depp's team to constantly question her character and her commitment to the causes she claimed to champion.
Before we get to the verdict, we have to talk about the decision that arguably transformed this high-profile trial into a cultural flashpoint. The decision to allow the courtroom proceedings to be broadcast live.
I mean, this was an exceptionally rare allowance for a Virginia Circuit Court.
Judge Asgrit made the call. And she cited a practical concern. She was worried about managing the massive gathering of reporters and photographers that was expected outside the courthouse. She felt it would create chaotic and hazardous conditions.
But that decision, It had these profound, unforeseen consequences once that content hit the internet.
It really just opened the floodgates. Stanford Law School professor Michelle Dauber publicly called it the single worst decision in recent memory for sexual violence victims.
Her concern, which was echoed by many legal scholars, was about the immediate chilling effect it would have. The idea that the televised and often mocked nature of the testimony would gravely discourage other survivors of violence from ever coming forward.
For fear of similar public scrutiny and humiliation.
Exactly. Allowing the cameras in transformed the entire legal process into this globally accessible spectacle. As Amanda Hess wrote for the New York Times, the decision made the proceedings gleefully tailored to a viewer's whim on platforms like TikTok and YouTube.
It turned the incredibly complex, difficult process of adjudicating abuse allegations into, as she put it, trial by TikTok.
Where sound bites and out-of-context clips reign supreme over the nuanced, weeks-long presentation of evidence in a courtroom.
So on June 1st, 2022, after nearly 2 full days of deliberations, the jury returned their verdict. And it was complex. Some legal analysts even call the outcome inconsistent.
It was definitely complex, but when you dissect the specific legal elements that were being tested, the findings actually reflect a very targeted application of the law to specific statements.
Okay, so let's focus first on Depp's defamation claim, the one about Heard's op-ed. What did the jury find?
The jury found Heard was liable in all 3 of the specific defamatory statements from the Washington Post article that we discussed earlier.
Which means they had to prove not just that the statements implied a connection to Depp, but that they were false and, most importantly, that they were made with actual malice.
And there's that crucial legal concept again. For a public figure like Depp to win, the jury had to be convinced by clear and convincing evidence that Heard had either deliberately lied when she wrote those 3 phrases or that she published them with a reckless disregard for their truthfulness.
And the jury sided with Depp on that.
They did. They confirmed that they believed those 3 implied statements were false and caused him reputational damage.
And what about the damages?
The jury awarded Depp $10 million in compensatory damages. That's to cover his financial and reputational losses. They also awarded him $5 million in punitive damages.
Which is money intended to punish Heard for the malice finding.
Exactly. However, Virginia state law has a cap on punitive damages. So the court immediately had to reduce that portion to $350,000. This meant Depp's total award was $10.35 million.
Okay, now let's turn to Heard's counterclaim. The verdict was not a total sweep for Depp.
No, it wasn't. The jury found that only the second of the 3 contested statements made by Depp's lawyer, Adam Waldman, was defamatory, false, and made with actual malice.
And that was the specific statement alleging that the 2016 penthouse incident was an ambush, a hoax, and that Heard and her friends had roughed the place up to set him up.
That's the one.
So if the jury largely sided with Depp regarding the general allegations of abuse in the op-ed, why did they find that Waldman's statement about the setup was defamatory and malicious? This is the core inconsistency that baffled a lot of people.
It's a great question. It suggests the jury drew a line between general allegations of abuse and specific allegations of criminal conduct, in this case, staging evidence for the police.
So they might have believed that even if Heard was an aggressor, she didn't conspire to frame him in that specific way.
That's what some legal experts have suggested, that the jury likely concluded that Waldman lied when he claimed Heard and her friends perpetrated a hoax when they called the police. Even if they didn't believe her on other points, they didn't believe Waldman's specific claim that she actively conspired to vandalize the apartment to frame Depp.
And what was Heard awarded for that?
She was awarded $2 million in compensatory damages for that single defamatory statement by Waldman, but $0 in punitive damages.
So this strange outcome, where both parties won counts and were awarded damages, led attorney Lisa Bloom to call the verdicts inherently inconsistent.
It really underscores the fact that the jury was tasked with judging the truthfulness of specific published statements, not necessarily the entirety of the relationship's history.
After the verdict, Heard's legal team filed motions to have the verdict set aside. What were their arguments?
They argued there were flaws in the process. The main one was a claim that one of the jurors was improperly identified listed with a birth year of 1945, but appearing to have been born in 1970.
But Judge Askerit denied those motions in July 2022.
She did, and quite firmly. Regarding the disputed juror, she noted that he had provided his proper birth date when he answered a court questionnaire, and, crucially, that Heard's legal team had not shown any evidence of prejudice.
Basically saying they had their chance to object earlier.
Exactly. She was very clear. A party cannot wait until they receive an adverse verdict to object to an issue they could have raised before the trial started. She concluded the court was banned by the competent decision of the jury.
Now, both parties initially filed appeals. Heard in October 2022 and then Depp in November, but they ultimately reached a settlement in December 2022.
Yes, which resulted in both of them dropping their appeals. Heard released a statement clarifying that the settlement was, in her words, not an act of concession. She stressed that she had lost faith in the American legal system and simply cannot go through the difficulty and scrutiny of a retrial.
What did the settlement entail financially?
Depp's lawyers confirmed that the settlement resulted in $1 million being paid to Depp by Heard's insurance company, and Depp pledged to donate that money to various charities.
Which brings us to the complex and enduring financial aftermath, specifically with the insurance industry.
This is a crucial and often overlooked part of the story. Heard had standard homeowners policies that actually covered costs associated with certain types of lawsuits, including defamation up to certain limits.
She had policies with New York Marine, which was up to $1 million, and Travelers, which covered about $500,000.
That's right. And following the verdict, the insurers faced a huge dilemma. The core issue wasn't whether they had to pay for her lawyers, but whether they were on the hook to pay the $10.35 million award.
So New York Marine sued Heard.
They did. They sought a declaration from the court that they had no duty to indemnify her for the damages awarded to Depp, and their entire argument rested on that jury finding of actual malice.
This is a really interesting lesson in insurance law, the difference between the duty to defend and the duty to indemnify.
It's a textbook example. The insurer typically has a duty to defend their client in court, which means paying for legal fees. And New York Marine did that. They reimbursed over $600,000 for Heard's counsel. But the duty to indemnify, to actually pay the judgment, that's often voided by certain policy exclusions.
And in this case, the exclusion was triggered by the jury's finding of actual malice.
Exactly. The California Insurance Code, which applied because that's where Heard resided, generally exempts coverage when a jury finds that the defendant intentionally or maliciously caused the harm.
So because the Virginia jury found that Heard made the defamatory statements with actual malice, knowing they were false, or acting with reckless disregard for the truth, the insurer successfully argued they were not obligated to pay the massive judgment.
Which makes that finding of actual malice incredibly expensive for the defendant. Ultimately, in October 2023, a district judge ruled in favor of New York Marine, and even more recently, in November 2024, the Ninth Circuit affirmed that condition.
So the appeals court solidified it. The finding of actual malice meant the insurer did not have to pay the damages.
That's correct.
The intensity of these legal battles, especially the financial fallout, it was often just overshadowed by the sheer magnitude of the public spectacle this trial became. And that was driven almost entirely by the decision to live stream it.
The live stream phenomenon created something we'd never really seen before on this scale. The Law and Crime Network, which streamed the whole thing, reported that their average daily viewership was 50 times higher than usual.
And the proceedings were just transformed into material that was instantly editable, shareable, allowing for this global participation in what was supposed to be a contained legal process.
Social media didn't just engage with the trial, it consumed it. The material became instantly digestible content on platforms like TikTok and YouTube. This was one of the first major global legal cases to be primarily processed, judged, and satirized by the court of public opinion in real time.
And the data points showing this immersion are just staggering. A detailed analysis from that period showed that news articles about the Depp v. Heard trial generated more social media interactions per article in the U.S. than any other major news topic at the time.
More than the initial global coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, more than the inflation surge hitting American households, more than the intense political debates around abortion rights.
That comparison is key. It tells us that the sensational nature of the celebrity drama, when it's packaged for quick consumption, was more algorithmically potent than events of major international and domestic importance.
And on TikTok, videos featuring the key search term "Justice for Johnny Depp" accumulated over 18 billion views by the time the trial concluded.
The quantitative imbalance in online support was dramatic. Data reported by BuzzFeed News from just 1 week in April 2022 showed pro-Depp posts on Facebook generated over 7 million interactions, compared to just over 10,000 interactions for posts supporting Heard.
The vast majority of the content was intensely sympathetic to Depp and highly critical, often just mocking, of Heard.
And this environment was just ripe for misinformation.
It spread like wildfire. False claims that Heard copied quotes from the film The Talented Mr. Ripley during her testimony went viral. Other falsehoods, like claims she was using cocaine on the stand, were widely circulated, even after they were disproven.
And research indicated this wasn't all just organic support. Conservative media sites like the Daily Wire reportedly spent tens of thousands of dollars on Facebook and Instagram ads that actively promoted anti-Amber Heard propaganda and misleading information about the trial.
So there was coordinated spending fueling this narrative.
The result was severe and targeted harassment. It was directed not just at Heard, but at anyone who offered her support. A report commissioned by her team detailed that women who voiced support for Heard were subjected to rampant abuse and widespread targeted harassment on social media.
This widespread online abuse was formally condemned in an open letter. It was signed by more than 130 organizations and individuals associated with women's rights and domestic violence prevention, including figures like Gloria Steinem.
And the letter attributed the vilification of Heard and her supporters to, and I'm quoting here, disinformation, misogyny, biphobia, and a monetized social media environment where a woman's allegations of domestic violence and sexual assault were mocked for entertainment.
There's also a psychological dimension to the social media response that deserves careful consideration. Professor Jennifer Freyd, who coined the acronym DARVO,
which stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse, Victim and Offender.
Yes. She commented that the overwhelming social media response was like an anti-Amber Heard campaign that contained a lot of DARVO.
Let's just unpack DARVO for a second because it is an essential concept here. If a survivor or a victim speaks out, DARVO describes the process where the abuser or their supporters will first deny the abuse ever occurred.
Then they attack the credibility and character of the accuser.
And finally, they reverse victim and offender, positioning the accuser as the actual perpetrator and the alleged abuser as the true victim.
And that pattern maps strikingly onto the online discourse we saw. The overwhelming focus was on dissecting Heard's emotional state, criticizing her lack of believability, and promoting this idea that she had masterminded a complete hoax.
This reversing of the roles, portraying Depp as the innocent, maligned victim of a complex setup, is the psychological hallmark of DARVO that Professor Freyd identified.
So when we try to assess the legitimacy of the trial, the question of whether this relentless public opinion machine influenced the jury is just unavoidable, especially since the jury was not sequestered.
Right. Judge Asgarit instructed them to refrain from reading about the case online, to turn off their cell phones. But as law professor Marianne Frank stated, it was crazy to think they are not going to be influenced by what's happening on social media when the case was dominating global conversations.
And it's interesting to note that one juror who was interviewed after the trial claimed the panel was not influenced by the social media frenzy. He said, "We followed the evidence. We didn't take into account anything outside."
However, that same juror gave some commentary on why they ruled as they did, and it provided some crucial insights into how the panel perceived the two parties. He said they found Heard didn't come across as believable.
And that she seemed like she was able to flip the switch on her emotions. He contrasted this with Depp, who he felt seemed a little more real in terms of how he responded to questions.
This is significant because it highlights how these subjective perceptions of credibility, which can be so easily influenced by media narratives around gender and emotion, may have outweighed some of the objective evidence presented.
The juror also indicated the panel considered Heard to be the aggressor in the relationship. He pointed to the question of why a victim in a battered wife or spouse situation would buy their aggressor a knife.
Which really reveals a potential difficulty in understanding the very complex dynamics of intimate partner violence, where relationships are often characterized by cyclical violence and trauma bonding.
And this complex result triggered immediate and widespread commentary on the implications for survivors and for the First Amendment. Many organizations focused on protecting survivors expressed this profound concern that the verdict, combined with the extreme online vilification, would set a precedent.
A precedent that would actively, quote, dissuade survivors of abuse from speaking out because of the financial and psychological threat of a retaliatory defamation lawsuit.
They characterized the ruling and the online response as indicating a fundamental misunderstanding of intimate partner and sexual violence, and suggested the trial inadvertently provided a roadmap for how abusers can use legal mechanisms and PR to silence their accusers.
Conversely, though, others celebrated the verdict. Some commentators saw it as a victory against what they termed cancel culture.
And others, like the sociologist Alexandra Lysova, suggested that the verdict was actually an expansion of the #MeToo movement, that it acknowledged and shed light on male victims of intimate partner violence. This split in interpretation just highlights the highly polarized cultural landscape this trial exposed.
But while these various cultural readings were emerging, the key legal consensus was reinforced.
Yes, that defamation suits filed by public figures in the United States very rarely succeed, just because of that high burden of proving actual malice. The fact that Depp succeeded on 3 counts and that Heard succeeded on 1 count regarding Waldman's specific allegations, it makes the whole outcome highly unusual.
And it underscores the very real financial and legal risks that are now facing both the press and accusers who want to speak out in the future.
To summarize this immense legal conflict, we really have to return to that central tension. You have a legal system attempting to adjudicate these highly sensitive, private allegations of intimate partner violence under unprecedented public scrutiny.
All complicated by robust free speech protections and the demanding rules governing defamation claims by public figures.
The essential legal finding remains that the jury determined 3 specific statements made by Heard in her op-ed were false and made with actual malice, resulting in reputational damage to Depp. Simultaneously, that same jury confirmed that Depp, through his attorney, defamed Heard regarding the alleged hoax of the 2016 incident.
That dual finding of actual malice just underscores the high complexity of the facts presented and the jury's attempt to distribute accountability for specific false statements.
And the media output surrounding this case is far from over. The events have been relentlessly adapted into content. There was a film, hot take, the Depp Heard trial that premiered in 2022. There have been several documentaries, including one from the BBC and the Netflix docuseries Depp v. Heard.
And looking ahead, there was a 2024 journalistic exploration, a podcast called Who Trolled Amber, which specifically alleged links between Depp and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
And further alleged that Saudi-funded bot networks were used to foster this widespread online support for Depp during the trial. So the cultural analysis of this case, particularly how narratives are manipulated online, is clearly still evolving long after the verdict was read.
We have to consider the immense distinction between a court's legal definition of defamation, which requires falsity and actual malice, and the judgment rendered by the court of public opinion.
If the jury determined that both parties engaged in specific defamatory behavior, what does that indicate about the complexity of intimate partner violence allegations and the difficulty inherent in seeking absolute truth when it's all filtered through both a legal system and a global, monetized social media lens?
The challenge for anyone caught in such a public storm is realizing that the pursuit of legal justice often collides violently with the pursuit of public redemption. A profound question for everyone to consider as they consume information today.
Thanks for listening.